So yeah, as Claire's just put in the chat, so Claire's alongside me. She's going to be helping out, facilitating the session today. And yeah, it'd be great if you feel happy to and you would like to, then by all means, please introduce yourselves in the chat. And yeah, use this space as well to kind of connect with people. There are going to be sort of some like-minded people on the course or on this webinar as well today. So if that's something you want to do, I'll be posting my LinkedIn on here shortly. So yeah, connect and use that as a platform to be able to do that. Okay, great. So I think we've got most people have sort of joined us now. So what I'll do is I will get the presentation underway, and we'll go from there. So again, yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Just before we kind of start, I'm just going to start with a little bit of kind of what we're calling like netiquette. So just to let you know, it is being recorded. So we've got the session. It will be sent to you afterwards. And if you know those the people that signed up or maybe can't make the whole session, then you can kind of catch up on that. So in order to do that, so what I'd really like to do is kind of use this space. It's sort of 3 hours, but we've got a 10-minute break. And try and avoid distractions, make sure you're comfortable. You don't need to worry about being on mute because it's a webinar scenario. So, and yeah, so engage with it, engage with the chat, and then we've got the questions and answer session will be open as well. So if you've got questions as we kind of go through, feel free to use the Q&A section of Zoom, and then we'll look to answer those questions towards the end. So quick kind of overview, bit of an agenda. We'll have about 15 minutes of kind of introductions, and then we'll dive into the sort of the first session, which is from Ian Stewart. So it's a short video from Ian. He used to be the director of the Sustainable Earth Institute. Then we look at the foundations of net zero. Then we have that sort of 20 or that 10-minute break in comfort break in the middle. And then we kind of introduce you to this novel concept of a net zero handprint and the action that we can kind of take. And then we look at kind of next steps and then Q&A at the end. So yeah, hopefully that's what everyone's sort of expecting for the day or for the morning session. So kind of before we get underway, who am I? So my name's Saul Whitford. I'm a Knowledge Exchange and Impact Officer on the project, which is called the Net Zero Exchange Project. So we sit in the University of Plymouth Sustainable Earth Institute. And really kind of my remit is to deliver courses like this. And there's a series of other courses that we do as well. This is the first of a series and a kind of the more introductory course. And then there's a 12-hour sessions that we've been running, and also a more in-depth 60-hour course as well called Future Climate Leaders, which is running at the moment. There's also another cohort which is running in December. So a bit of background about me. So I had about 20 years of sort of commercial experience before I kind of started to work in HE, and they're working predominantly in manufacturing sector and looking at our net zero journey and kind of led that sustainability kind of projects and campaigns throughout those organizations as well. So yeah, so I also, for my sins, I used to be a surf instructor as well. So kind of a bit of the fun side of it, and also, yeah, did a few seasons snowboarding as well. So in terms of course completion, what we'd really like to see is for everyone's obviously to be here for the whole time with us this morning. In order to kind of get your certificate at the end of this course, we really need to see you for 80% of that time here, and actually participating in all of the quizzes as well. There's going to be 3 quizzes, short quizzes throughout, and a couple of other kind of interactive elements as well to kind of keep you engaged. So it's not just me sort of talking the whole time. It's actually you've got to think as well and kind of use some of the information that we've been talking about this morning. One thing we're doing as well at the university, we're kind of a research-led university, and we're actually using these courses for a research paper. So if you're happy to do so, what I'd really like you to do, just take a few minutes at the moment for now and scan this QR code. and it takes you to a short questionnaire. And if you're happy to be part of this research, it's anonymous, but it really looks at how do we teach sort of these topics of net zero and sustainability, and how can we improve? What's the best way to do it? Is the best way to do it through webinars? Is it through in person? Is it through a series of lectures? So it's really examining how do we actually go about having the most impact with what we do. So what I'll do is I'll leave that up there just for a few minutes. Hopefully you guys can scan that and do it. And it's kind of really, really important that we do this before we kind of do everything else, because the idea is that it kind of gauges how well that knowledge has been kind of interpreted, and how effective it has been. So it's a bit of an kind of course evaluation, but it's much more than that, because it'll actually feed into some research and development as well. So I should give you a couple minutes to do that, and load that up. And so yeah, if you are doing this, once you've kind of completed it, if you could maybe just put a thumbs up or in the chat, then I can kind of get a bit of a gauge if people are kind of at that stage, and we can move swiftly on. So I can see some reactions coming in there. Perfect. So I'll move on now. And really, in the first instance, again, I kind of want to pose a question to you. Um, I kind of everyone's got their own journey when it kind of comes to this sustainability, and kind of wanting to find out more about this, and hopefully that's why you're here. But I really want to hear it from you. Why have you come on this course this morning? What sort of sparked that interest in it? And so if you can either scan the QR code with your phone, or if you can go to the link. Um, Go to menti.com and enter the code, which is sort of on the screen, then we can kind of get a bit of an understanding, and add in sort of 3 words. So it'll take you to a page, and ask you to, in 3 words, sort of why is it that you've come today, and that will kind of create a bit of a word cloud for us to be able to see and understand. And I just want you to reflect on, what is it you're kind of wanting to get out of this? Is it learning? Is it sort of education, more knowledge? Are you worried about the things that you're hearing in the news? Sort of. So just to kind of get a bit of an understanding as to why you're here today. Great. Okay. Well, there. Yeah. Thanks for you guys for doing that. Really appreciate that. What we'll do is it's kind of good to get an idea of exactly sort of why it is then um, that we hear. And I can see now, yeah, lots of responses, lots of knowledge, learning, appreciation, sort of improvement, further education, better understand, curiosity, scope 3 challenges. Yeah, that's yeah, really good. Definitely all stuff that we're going to be covering off today. So yes, let's jump into it. So this image, people might be familiar with it. It's the name of the picture is called Earthrise, and it was taken for Apollo 8 all the way back in 1968. And the person that took it is called Jim Lovell, an astronaut, and it said it construed the vast loneliness in an awe-inspiring way and makes you realise exactly what we've got on Earth. And it's really essentially this Earth is the only place that we know in the whole of the universe that kind of supports life. And that's the fragility and the finite nature of that, being able to see everything in one picture, the whole of the human race, and that kind of idea and realization that actually what we have is so very precious, and we need to look after it. And I think at the moment it's something that isn't necessarily it's happening in the way that we would want it to be. So just want to kind of start off with that image. But also from a kind of a risk and a business risk and a kind of impact kind of perspective. The World Economic Forum, they provide this global risk report, and over they survey a number of people, thousands of organizations and governments, and people, members of the public. And what we're seeing is on that 10-year horizon, we're seeing extreme, these top sort of four are are all sort of climate change related. They're all kind of climate risks. So we're looking there, extreme weather events, critical change to Earth systems, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, and natural resource shortage. And that's a huge issue. And even number 5, I think, kind of can tie in with that, around that misinformation, that disinformation, where we see, David Attenborough said that, and it's highlighted in the IPC, or the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change reports, that actually, communicating this issue is actually one of the risks as well. So even number 5, I could argue is actually kind of an environmental risk, and put that kind of that sustainability spin within those risk factors. So this is what we're up against, and this is what people perceive to be those risks, and it's really about kind of this. Again, another image that we've used and seen in the news, and this is actually a picture taken from Oregon in the USA, and it's about really how can we maintain this business as normal, and continue on when the things around us are burning, and so it's this stark image of people kind of playing golf. As if sort of it's just a normal day, when actually all the world around them is quite literally burning. So we're gonna look at sort of some of the reasons and some of the science behind why these things are happening, and why net zero can be the answer to this, and then actually how we drive impact and make a difference and make a change. So just as an introduction, we're going to kind of look at some kind of key terms and interchangeable terms that kind of get used and bandied about. Net zero, so it refers to achieving a balance between the amount of greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere and the amount removed from it. And it's a real pivotal concept in terms of combating climate change. And just again, looking at a couple of terms here, carbon neutrality and net zero, often they're kind of used interchangeably, and so there's just kind of there's a nuanced sort of difference between the two of them. And so being carbon neutral really is about that balancing of the human-made carbon dioxide emissions, and doing that with offsets, but really it doesn't necessarily reduce the amount that you're actually using. Whereas this concept of net zero is really aiming to reduce emissions by 90%, and then reduce then offset the residual emissions with carbon removal from the atmosphere, and that's through natural processes or through technological innovation. So this concept of net zero is really about striving to minimize and reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we are producing, and not just carbon dioxide. So looking at it in another way, so people learn sort of graphically. So this is kind of, this chart shows this pathway that we have to net zero and the journey that we're on at the moment. So the top line really signifies the increases in carbon dioxide emissions, and what we're kind of needing to do it. And there's going to basically be that rising before it will start to kind of come down. And we're looking to reduce that. And as you can see, the yellow there is the business as usual, and the green is avoidance projects, so ways in which we can actually avoid it and reduce our carbon footprints, both as organisations and as individuals. And then this journey to net zero will actually be with carbon removal projects. So projects that actually remove the carbon from the atmosphere as well. So we've seen very recently the government saying that they're going to be spending, I think it's a bit of billions, I'm not sure of the exact figure, but on carbon capture and removal. And there's various kind of arguments for and against that. So that's an example there of kind of carbon removal projects. So direct air capture, again, removing carbon from the air. So this is these projects that we're going to see in the future in order to get us to net zero. And in the UK, we've got a target of doing that by 2050, which we'll talk about more in the future. So a bit about the kind of the science sort of background to it. It may be a journey back down memory lane to school for some people. And I was always amazed when I first saw this kind of composition of the Earth's atmosphere, and that actually the carbon dioxide is such a really small part, like 0.004% is actually carbon dioxide. Yet it has such a massive warming impact. So I always just kind of like to sort of show this slide as in to say actually that this tiny gas has such a massive impact, and that was just staggering to me. So I like to highlight it. And it's not just carbon dioxide. There's a number of other greenhouse gases as well: methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, as well as water vapor. And what we use is carbon dioxide as a kind of common currency. So we convert other gases, other activities into a carbon dioxide ton of carbon dioxide equivalency. So then we can kind of talk in terms, and everyone knows, rather than comparing apples with pears, we can compare apples with apples. So that's often where we talk about greenhouse gases, but really we're talking about kind of this carbon dioxide equivalence. So just to understand, how does global, or the heating of the planet actually work? So we get solar radiation, and it reaches the Earth's atmosphere, and it comes down, and it's light energy, and some of that light energy is reflected by the sea, some of it's reflected by the ice cap, some of it's reflected by the edge of the atmosphere and clouds, and then some of that is absorbed and turned into heat, so absorbed by the land, absorbed by the oceans, and then some of that is radiated back out from the land and the sea, and some of it goes straight into space. But other bits are captured by the atmosphere, captured by greenhouse gases, which have this ability to hold heat. And what we're seeing is then human activities such as burning of fossil fuels, agriculture, different uses of land, is actually increasing the amount of gas, of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And this is trapping more heat. So it's the ability for the planet to hold more heat, which is causing this warming. And so the analogy that we use is that everyone's been to the beach. You know, you've gone and it's a hot sunny day. You've left the car and you think, you know what, I've left something in the car. You run back, and even within a few minutes, the car's really warmed up. And what we're talking about here is actually if you put down those windows just a little bit, it allows then for the air to kind of circulate around. And essentially what we're doing by the burning of these fossil fuels is we're putting those windows up, so we're trapping all of that air in. And what we need to be doing is kind of putting those windows down. But this greenhouse effect is a natural phenomenon, and actually we need it to survive on the planet. Without it, the Earth will be about -18 degrees, so it will be pretty cold, too cold for us to survive. So it's essentially we do need this greenhouse effect. It's just the fact that it's changing, and the impact that humans are having by burning fossil fuels it's driving that impact. So I've got a picture of a nice juicy apple here, green apple with a bite taken out of it. And the reason I put this up is when we kind of think about the atmosphere, we look up to the sky, not on a day like today, looking out the window next to me, it's grey and miserable, but on a nice blue, bright, sunny day, you look up and it seems like it goes on kind of infinitely, and it essentially does into space. But actually the bit of the atmosphere that we're sort of talking about up in kind of to the edge of the stratosphere, it's actually the equivalent. If the Earth was the size of an apple, it's only the thickness of the skin that covers the apple. So that's a very, very thin layer that we're talking about. Again, it's that fragility of this atmosphere that we're thinking is actually sort of so infinite, is actually very thin, very small. So again, just another analogy to help to understand the atmosphere and the size of that. So greenhouse gas emissions. Again, as I mentioned, what are greenhouse gases? Kind of touched upon that. Carbon dioxide, that's the main one, the most prevalent one. Then we've got methane, nitrous oxide, and what we're finding is these industrial processes, these such as like burning of fossil fuels for energy and agriculture, deforestation, they're increasing the rate at which these are being released into the atmosphere, and these are being trapped and causing global warming, which is leading to climate change. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions by sector, so this chart shows us that actually around 73% of global greenhouse gas emissions are coming from energy use. So that might be actually burning of kind of fuels within fires and around the world, and kind of using that for heat, but also using of electricity. So in the UK, we predominantly use gas. We just closed our last coal-fired power station last week, which was really only accounting for sort of less than 1% of our energy mix at the time, which is again why we were able to do that, because predominantly we kind of rely on natural gas as the major contributor. And then we see energy being used, again, in terms of fossil fuels for transportation, in terms of diesel, in terms of petrol, but also within sort of manufacturing and construction as well. We see a large proportion of that. And the other major contributor there is agriculture, in terms of actually the megatons of CO2 equivalents which are kind of produced. But yeah, a massive proportion there. So we can see where the areas are that we would really need to tackle in order to be reducing our kind of carbon dioxide. And again, looking at greenhouse gas emissions by the actual gas, so we can see again, carbon dioxide, as I mentioned, it's the most prevalent one. It accounts for 74% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and these other gases, they're much smaller, but what we find as well is they're much more potent. So they're up to sort of 3,000 or 4,000 times more potent. And when I say more potent, I mean the ability for the same amount to cause the same that multiplication of heating, the ability for it to trap that heat is thousands of times more. So actually, yes, while CO2 is most prevalent, these other ones also have a massive impact, but they are less long lasting. So carbon dioxide kind of breaks down within the atmosphere at a much slower rate, while these other ones break down much quicker. So we're going to move on now to Ian Stewart. So Ian Stewart was the director of the Sustainable Earth Institute at the University of Plymouth, and he's been on various BBC documentaries. He's a geologist by trade, and so we showed this video because it's a few years old now, but it was a part of a webinar series that we produced with him for Plymouth 2030 or Plymouth Future 2030. And he just does a really great intro into the need for net zero and some of the background to that as well. So I'm just going to load this video up for you now. Bear with me 2 seconds.
Great, thanks for that. So yeah, I'm director of the Sustainable Earth Institute, which you've just heard as a kind of a one-stop shop around all things sustainable within the university. I'm a geologist by background and really been involved in making television documentaries about climate change. I'm on the Devon Net Zero Task Force, and I'm communications lead for the Scottish Climate Assembly that's happening right now north of the border. So I'm interested in climate change, communication of climate change, and that's what I want to talk to you about. And the talk really starts a million miles away from here, many thousands in Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, in the middle of the Pacific, because it's here in the late 1950s that a scientist called Dave Keeling starts to measure carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, the knowledge of carbon dioxide as a warming agent in the atmosphere has been known about for 150 years, but in terms of actually measuring it, it wasn't really started until 1958, 59, and you can see those measurements here, and you can see the rise and fall, the seasonal variation of CO2 in the atmosphere, but also you can see the broad rising trend. That rising trend was apparent even in the first few years. In fact, in 1965, Lyndon Johnson, as president of the US, in a statement to Congress, has this line: air pollution is no longer confined to isolated places. This generation has altered the composition of the atmosphere on a global scale through radioactive materials and a steady increase in carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels. So the science of climate change really was already well established by the early 60s, such that the leader of the US was talking about this as just a matter of fact. That then leads to, we have to wait for 2 decades really for the first World Meteorological Conference, where all the climate scientists getting together. They recommend the start of the initiation of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, an advisory group that really assesses the science. We have Margaret Thatcher speaking to the UN in 1989, talking about this critical development of negotiating a framework convention on climate change, the first world leader to really talk about climate change as something of international organization. And then in 1990, we have the first report of the International Panel on Climate Change. So our knowledge of the kind of the institutional international framework around climate change is very long-standing in terms of the knowledge that carbon dioxide is having that effect. And yet, when that started, the CO2 levels were something like 312 parts per million. I checked the other day, as of start of the week, it was 412 parts per million. And you think 100 parts per million, that's not really much. Well, in the long-term perspective, it is. This is a really long-term perspective, a geological perspective. 800,000 years of measurements of carbon dioxide measured from ice cores in Antarctica in particular, showing the planet oscillating between 180 and 280 parts per million, going from ice ages, where it's got very low levels of that greenhouse gas, to a more greenhouse, less ice on the planet when we have higher levels. And that fluctuations is the orbital changes of the planet. So it's got nothing to do with humans. Modern humans, in fact, only come in around about 200,000 years. So we've got a record of CO2 in the atmosphere measured 4 times longer than modern humans have been on the planet. And yet what you see coming out of the last ice age, which ended at 20,000 years, is a steady increase as usual, till you would expect around at the turn of the 20th century for it to start falling again, but it doesn't. It keeps on going. It goes to 300, 350, 380, 400, 412. Completely unprecedented. You have to go back tens of millions of years to find the planet at those kind of levels. And why is that? Well, what we're seeing here is the kind of industrial era, really tracking both our burning of fossil fuels, of coal, of gas, of oil, and it's the kind of parallel effect on atmospheric CO2. So the little box shows you the instrumental record of Dave Keeling that we saw from Mauna Loa. What we see on the left-hand side is hardly anything happens really in terms of the Industrial Revolution through the 1800s and early 1900s, and then it really starts to take off. And then what we see in the right-hand side of the line rather, is what would happen in a future world if we continued on that trajectory of business as usual, as we call it. And we see carbon dioxide parts per million going up to 500, 600, 700, 800. Again, you have to go back into times when the North Atlantic Ocean is not there to start to get those kind of measurements. So this is a geological change that humans are actually affecting on the planet. As a result of that, the warming action, we know the temperature. We've been measuring temperature really instrumentally since the 1850s in the UK. And we've got steadily broader and better coverage in the oceans, on the kind of extreme parts of the lands, and indeed in different levels of the atmosphere. And what we can see is a kind of general low levels of temperature close to the pre-industrial levels in the 1800s and early 1900s, and then that steady incline. You can see there the list of coldest years on record, which are generally late 1800s, early 1900s. And then on the right-hand side, the hottest on record is 2016, and it was last year, and it was 2017, 2015, 2018, you get the picture. We're switching across into much more warmer than long-term average temperatures. Of course, a big question is, maybe there's some natural, we know there's natural changes going on, we know that the orbital changes can have an effect, that's what drives climate in the long term. But we also know that other things, volcanoes, for example, can cause fluctuations. So the Met Office, for example, has got a supercomputer that runs a lot of the climate models, essentially the same model, a stripped down version that actually does the weather forecasting. So the basic physics of the weather of climate are the same. It's just as you extrapolate them out, you strip it back and you have more simple versions. And what you see in that graph is the blue line is what we should expect. We run the models, we understand how they calibrate them to what's happening, we run them backwards, check them against our historical record and see how accurate that's been and tailor them. And we see that if we just try and explain, the total changes you can see in black is what's actually happened. What you see is if you just have a natural effect in there, you get the blue line. So you see ups and downs of various volcanoes, etc. And the solar activity, so the activity of the sun. And we see that it tracks pretty well until the mid part of the 20th century, and then natural processes continue flatlining a little bit, and you see the temperature kind of rise up. And the thing that tracks it's anthropogenic. It's that burning of fossil fuels and other anthropogenic greenhouse gases. So as a result, what we have now, the latest IPCC report was in 2014. And the statements there are pretty similar to the very early studies that came out in the 70s. Warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Basically, since the 1950s in particular, those changes are unprecedented in the record we've got. That the levels of CO2 and other greenhouse gases are, again, unprecedented in the last 800,000 years, nearly a million years. That human influence on the climate is now just clear. That 95 to 100% probability that the warming in the second part of the 20th century up to today has been dominated by human influence. The magnitude of the changes are starting to be seen as severe, pervasive, and most worryingly irreversible. And if we're not going to continue with new policies, the business as usual model is going to rise. It's going to produce temperatures of 3.7 to 4.8 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And this graph really shows us a very simple relationship that basically as we add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which is in the horizontal axis, temperature, which is in the vertical axis, goes up. And what we can see is that how much we warm, because there's that direct relationship with CO2, the amount that we warm is dependent on the amount of carbon dioxide we put in. So it's not just a case of slowing down our rate of increase, because any increase in CO2 will have a warming effect. We need to get our emissions down to net zero. And you can see the projections of the kind of business as usual model there. If we don't, you can see by 2020, we're already at 1.5 degrees Celsius above what we expect. But if you continue on, by the time we get to 2050, it's 2.5. By the time we get to 2060, maybe a 3-degree rise in temperature. So all of that really leads us to why we had a big, the Paris Climate Agreement, the COP, the Conference of the Parties in 2015, which remarkably ended up in an agreement to try and limit temperature increase to well below 2 degrees C, and to attempt to pursue it to limit, in fact, to 1.5 degrees C, which is what the argument is. Beyond that, we think we're going to have these irreversible tipping points in climate. But it's something more than just the science in terms of the Paris Climate Agreement, because that agreement of almost every country, I think there's something like 3 that didn't do it, is based on principles of what's called equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. What does that mean? Well, let's unpack that a little bit. Equity. There are some countries that are more responsible for emissions than others. It's not even the distribution. So here we see 3/4 of the emissions is produced by 10 countries or unions of countries. You see here China, United States, and the European Union are the big 3. That the bottom 100 countries account for only 3.5% of the emissions. So there's something around social justice here, but international justice about who should be doing the most about this. And the UK is part of, I was going to say it's part of the European Union, inappropriate anymore, but as part of that European industrial set of countries is a big emitter. And probably more relevant to the UK is the idea of responsibility, because CO2 hangs around in the atmosphere for decades. So a lot of the CO2 that's up there causing the warming now is CO2 that we've put up there from our industrial revolution that's really dominated the UK over the last couple of centuries. So we're ranked 5th for total carbon dioxide emissions. And much of that is this role that we've had as the birthplace of the industrial revolution. I put the Newcomen engine there. If you want to see one, you go to Dartmouth. The Newcomen engine was what led the tin mine extension, the James Watt tinkering with it, allows us to go deeper, development of coal mines, all of that takes off, and it gets us our industrial wealth, but it also produces this incredible environmental legacy. So there's a huge responsibility on some of these countries to do more than other countries. And then finally, capability, who is most capable of change? Well, we're pretty wealthy. We're wealthy in terms of GDP, 6th out of the 2003. But we're also wealthy in capability in terms of resources. We have lots of options. So we've got different energy options, for example, and options in other ways. So we have the capability to do more than some other countries. So those 3 things collectively suggest that the UK could and should be a big driver in that global leadership. Now, this is the scary one. This is what Paris has said we need to do. So what we can see here is there's a rise in emissions. We need to peak and have them go down as soon as possible. If we'd started back in 1990 when we first had the IPCC, the first report, etc., we would have had a very gentle yellow-shaped curve down, and we could have taken a leisurely time about this. But that intervening time period meant we now have a really dramatic fall in order to get down to net zero. So that means we have essentially a climate emergency. That's what we mean by that. That's why people are getting agitated. That's why people are taking to the streets as well. And that's really motivating change, because as we'll see here, this is a graph of the percent of the public that is essentially worried about environment enough to have it as one of the top 3 issues facing the country. And what we see is it broadly sits underneath 10% through the last decade or so. It spikes above that when we have extreme weather, like in 2014 with the floods. It comes to the attention of the news media and the public. But you also see that steady rise more recently, which is Greta, the climate strikes, David Attenborough, and him really coming out kind of talking about climate change as a big issue. And of course, groups like Extinction Rebellion taking to the streets and making this a very public issue. However, before we get carried away, this is everyone's coming on board. This is a plot showing the concern about climate change across the population over the last decade in a different way. Now, on the face of it, it's great. 80% of the British public are now fairly or very concerned about climate change. But what you'll see is that in 2019, the values are pretty similar to what they were back in 2008. That is, most people are broadly concerned about it. There's some that aren't very concerned. That's a small amount, residual amount, not very concerned at all. But what it shows you is that actually broadly people are concerned, but we're still not doing very much about it. So there's a big change that has to motivate people from a broad passive concern to actually doing action, and this action we desperately need. Why is that? Well, this is from LAC, a survey that we've done last year, looking at segmenting the public into different publics. There was something similar in America called the 6 Americas. This is the 5 UK publics. And what it shows you, for example, on the left-hand side is the 5 publics, that there's some people highly engaged in this. There's other people moderately engaged. There's other people that are action wary. In other words, they recognize there's an issue, but they're wary about doing something. And then there's a group that's uncertain, and then there's a group that actually thinks it's not a problem. And what you see there is how those things change as we go through different aspects about how it's important, how we should have taxis, etc. So people might accept that there's climate change, but what we do about it is a much bigger problem. And you'll see that even in the groups, in terms of opinions, that the majority of people are in the messy middle, hard to reach, hard to enact. So the last slide really here just introduces to, I think, the issue that I think is a big one. It's not about the science. The science is settled. Science was settled in the 1960s. The issue is how we connect people to turn their broad concern about climate change into action, such that they support really dramatic and effective changes. And on the back of that, I just want to play a really short video about how it's all about.
So, yeah, that was a video from Ian, and again, it just really kind of gives you that flavour of exactly, what it is that we are looking to do here. So, what is he going to do? Is go back to the slideshow. 2 seconds. Great.
Framing. It's about.
Stop Ian from talking again. Okay, so I just want to kind of recap on some of the points, pick out some of the bits that that Ian said there, and kind of bring it up to date. And so really, again, like it's unequivocal what we're seeing there. 97%, like I said, between 95 and 100%. So we're saying around 97% of scientific peer-reviewed papers between 91 and 2011 agree that human activity is the main cause for climate change. So it's really, really everyone is agreeing on this. And how things stand today. So I think in Ian's video, we were talking about, he was saying it's around 412 parts per million. Now we're up at 430 parts per million. There's seasonal variation within that. So it's less in the summer, it's more in the winter due to all of the leaves coming out on the trees. And so the last time it was as high as this, you have to go around back around sort of 4 million years. So again, I think in Ian's video, he mentioned it's about 1 million years ago. So this is even within these last sort of 5 or 6 years, we're seeing this massive jump up. And so it's it's really quite sort of scary in terms of what's sort of happening. So what does this actually mean? Really kind of global temperatures, if you go back that kind of time, the last time they were at that kind of level, temperatures were 3 to 4 degrees higher than they are now. So we kind of see this lagging effect. Like you mentioned, that we're still that's why we need to get to net zero, because even if we stop right now, it's still got this heating effect of the CO2 that's in there, which is, again, at the beginning, I was talking about how we need these carbon removal projects as well to kind of get us beyond sort of almost net zero. So sea levels, again, last time it was this high, they were between 5 meters and 40 meters higher, depending on where in the world you are. And the issue, again, is not necessarily the level that they're at, it's the rate at which they're changing. So they haven't been changing this quickly for 66 million years ago, for 66 million years. And that was the extinction, the dinosaurs. And someone was doing this training a little while ago, and someone raised it, and they said, "Oh, I thought it was an asteroid that killed the dinosaurs." And it was like, yes, yeah, that is what happened. That is the cause of it. What that one cataclysmic event is what caused the CO2 to rise in that way, with multiple volcanoes erupting and the kind of detritus that kind of form part of this asteroid hitting. And it kind of highlighted to me, we don't have this one cataclysmic event, and maybe if we did, people would kind of pay more attention to it. But because it's been this quite literally this slow burn of fossil fuels, and it's been gently kind of happening over the course of 150 years, we don't kind of have that urgency which we need in order to do it, along with other kind of factors which are impacting it. So yes, you can kind of see there's some satellite data around the sea level again is rising, and it will continue to do so. In terms of the average global temperature, we're kind of already seeing that we're breaching that 1.5 degrees, and it's just sort of slightly rising. We're seeing a lot of records being broken. Sort of last 12 months, the hottest sort of on record globally. It might not necessarily feel like that here in the UK, where it's been a bit damp and miserable and cooler. But again, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about the weather here, what's happening within months, weeks, when we look out the window and what's happening. We're talking about climate, we're talking about long-term trends over multiple years. And that's really the difference between kind of the weather that we see outside our window and the climate, which is the longer-term view of the weather. And again, just a couple more charts just to reiterate that. So daily sea surface temperatures that we're seeing, they've been really very high, sort of 21 degrees plus for the majority of this year. Again, you can see that red line there is this year, and the previous year in 2023 is the yellow line. So you can see at the beginning of the year, massive sort of increases that we're seeing. We've kind of fallen back down, but that's still well above the kind of averages that we've been seeing previously, and well above those pre-industrial levels that is denoted there with the kind of the dotted lines. Or actually, that's not even pre-industrial, that's just sort of around 2000s as a kind of baseline. So we've seen this massive increase in sea surface temperatures, and then also that's kind of comes hand in hand with the air surface temperatures as well, that we've seen not quite as larger rises there in the air surface temperatures, but the sea surface, the actual oceans managed to absorb a lot of the heat, and massive carbon dioxide sinks as well. So as I mentioned, we're already breaching that 1.5 degree limit that the Paris Agreement kind of highlighted, and those temperatures are lagging. So we're going to see that kind of continue to increase, even if we kind of cut emissions today. So Ian mentioned the kind of global targets that were set out in the Paris Agreement. So it was adopted in 2015, again to limit that global warming to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, with efforts to keep it limited to 1.5 degrees. So we're really going to struggle to kind of do that at the moment, and really we want to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and put climate actions and goals in place. So it's a crucial strategy in order to help us kind of fight climate change, and we've got broad consensus from all of pretty much from everyone, the leaders around the world. The issue is now actually driving that action and being able to do something about it rather than just kind of sitting on laurels and saying, yeah, we've got these targets, but okay, what can we do? So in terms of actually some of the actions, also 2015 was a pretty big year for the UN in terms of sustainability. So they also developed the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's a number of those. Well, there's 17 of those, but a lot of those highlighted, particularly number 13, so climate action, which is specifically around climate change and the ability to do it. So these are really that we agreed upon to secure a future of prosperity and peace for everyone on the planet, and that was also leaving no one behind. So that equity, and there's only sort of a few years left, really, like 6 years left now. The idea is to get to these by 2030. So it's really a case of kind of all hands on deck. Here in the UK. We were kind of a world leader when it came to net zero. The government set up net zero targets for greenhouse gas emissions to be net zero by 2050, and that was recommendations made by the Committee on Climate Change. And so this was back in 2008, and it was amended in 2009. So in 2008, as a target of 80%, and then was amended to be 100%, because I think everyone essentially thought that they were in that 20% that didn't actually have to do it. So now it's 100%. Everyone knows that they need to reduce their carbon or their greenhouse gas emissions. An interesting thing for me is that the Paris Agreement refers to pre-industrial limits in terms of degrees of warming as a baseline, whereas our net zero ambition is set against a 1990s baseline. I'm not 100% sure why there's that kind of difference, but again, it's when we talk about net zero, sometimes you've got to kind of think about actually what's the scope of that, what's the baseline, what are we comparing it to, so things that we kind of need to consider when we just see that kind of headline claim. In terms of how we kind of get to these net zero sort of targets, each year the government set, or the Committee on Climate Change set carbon budgets. So there's a 5-year period of how much carbon we can use within that period. So this next budget is coming out in the end of February next year, and the current sort of cycle that we're in at the moment, we've actually managed to be under budget, and this is predominantly due to the effects of the pandemic and COVID, where we saw obviously massive reductions in everyone moving and manufacturing and all the rest of it. So we have managed to come in under budget for this previous 5-year period, but again, that was kind of circumstances which were kind of outside of our control. There's also legislation which we're seeing for some of the largest organisations in the UK. So what's called the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting, or SECA. That's kind of for public companies or very large companies. As you can see there, turnover over 36 million, or 250 employees, balance sheet of 18 million or more. So legislation is coming down, but predominantly, SMEs within the UK, they make up sort of 99% of it, of the economy. So we'll need, smaller organisations as well to be kind of taking and bearing the weight of a lot of reducing this carbon dioxide and these greenhouse gas emissions. Ian touched upon sort of, why is it that 1.5 degrees is important? So what we see is at 1.5 and 2 degrees, we see a lot of tipping points, places where if we get to that level, actually things start happening, which means that we can't then undo them. It's going to start to become irreversible. And just looking at a couple of these bits in terms of extreme heat, actually the effect that it has between 1.5 and 2 degrees, it's not just, it's in magnitudes which are far outweigh just that kind of 0.5. So it's not just 25 it's worse, it's 2.6 times worse than it is in terms of extreme heat. So at least once every 5 years. So we're seeing a 10 times worsening, just that 0.5 degree increase from 1.5 to 2 degrees for the sea ice in the Arctic. Sea level rise, we're seeing a significant rise in that. And then in terms of biodiversity loss, species loss for vertebrates, for plants, and for insects, it's all having a massive, massive impact there. We're also seeing this across ecosystems. Permafrost is a really big one because there's a lot of methane which is stored within the permafrost in the kind of tundra in kind of northern areas of Canada and Russia. So we're kind of seeing that as a massive issue. And coral reefs, again, we're seeing kind of, I think it's the fifth great bleaching, which happened a few months ago, beginning of the summer. So we're seeing that they're essentially, coral reefs are like the canary in the coal mine for us. So if they're the first sort of things to go. So again, a real impact that just a small degree of warming is, I think people kind of think, 1 degree, actually, maybe would it be nice if it was a little bit warmer? What impact does that have? But it really does have massive, significant impacts. So I'm kind of aware it's been about an hour and 20 minutes or so of me talking and a video from Ian. And really, I suppose I just want to let you reflect on the amount of information that you've had and kind of let it sink in a bit. Because, like I say, it's a lot of information. So just sort of pause here, think about kind of what it is that we've been speaking about, or that I've been speaking about this morning. Take a couple of minutes to reflect on, what's the most important thing? What's the most shocking thing? Do you already know all of that? And kind of once you've done that, I think, you look at this wheel as like an emotions wheel. It's like, how's this information, how's this sort of last hour, how's that made you feel? Kind of maybe learning that, maybe kind of it's been confirmationary. So in the chat, if you can kind of maybe just write down a couple of words about, how's it made you feel? Yeah, if you're happy to share that. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, anxious. Yeah, I think a lot of people would be, eco anxiety is a really big thing. We're kind of seeing it happen again amongst school children, against people of sort of younger, across the generations. That people are kind of worrying about these things and thinking about, what is it that I can do here? So yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of information to cover. Yeah, Adam. So yeah, scary and angry. Yeah, that's it. More concerned than I was, yeah, before. Yeah, Andy. It's there is a it's very difficult sort of bitter pill to swallow. And what we're really hoping to do now in this sort of next session. So I'm going to launch a quiz in a minute. So just to kind of just a bit of fun, and we'll kind of go through that. So I'll launch that now for you guys. So just have your best sort of stab at it. Like I say, it's just a bit of fun. It's just to see sort of how much is sort of going in, and what we'll do is I'll hopefully everyone can see that, and I'll sort of see some answers sort of start to come in. So it's just 6 questions. And yeah, we'll kind of go through that in a minute once I've got some of the answers in, and go through the correct answers as well. So yeah, just take a few minutes to do that. Right, you can see some people answering that. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. So I'll give you about a minute more to sort of answer that. Like I say, don't worry if you don't know the answers, just give it a go. Um, okay, guys. So I can see the majority of you have completed that. So yeah, appreciate that. Thank you very much for doing that. So I'm going to end the poll in just a few seconds. Okay. So just sharing the results now. Hopefully you can all see that. So question 1, what temperature would the Earth be without the greenhouse gas effect? So there we can see, yes, it would be -18. So it would be very, very cold. Majority of everyone got that one right. So yeah, well done. Question 2, complete the sentence. Net zero refers to achieving a balance between the amount of green. I can't read the whole thing, but everyone there has got that right. So well done. Again, question 3, carbon dioxide makes up what percentage of the atmosphere? So this one here, again, the majority have got that right. That is around, it's 0.04%. So well done. Question 4, complete the sentence. The Paris Agreement 2015 mandates that countries will keep the global temperature increase below 1.5 degrees, above below 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees. So it's actually well below 2 degrees. So around half of you got that right. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one. So yeah, there are quite similar answers. That one was a bit more difficult, but yeah, over half of you getting that one right. So well done. Again, number 5, the top 10 contributors account for approximately how much of global emissions? So it's 75% on this one. So again, the majority of you getting that one right. Again, quite tricky. So yes, the top 10 countries actually contribute 75% of all global emissions. Pretty crazy, I always think. And then complete the sentence. Delaying action on climate makes it easier or makes it harder. So actually, it makes it harder. So yeah, the vast majority of you getting that one right. So yeah, well done. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we kind of had all the doom and gloom. We kind of we understand actually these are the issues that we're kind of facing. We understand the science behind it. We understand why the climate is changing. Actually, we're going to look at sort of what is it that we can kind of do about this, and how do we sort of measure it? So Peter Drucker, who was a famous management consultant, and he's often credited with saying you can't manage what you can't measure. So sure some of you will be familiar with this, and it's just this quote sort of it emphasizes the importance of measuring and defining and setting measurable goals to establish an outcome. So what we're going to look at in the next few slides is how just one framework essentially that helps us to measure our carbon footprint, and this is specifically within an organization. Oh, sorry, I've gone across 2 there. So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol It was established by the World Resource Institute and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And it was these two institutions, they came together when they realised that there was a need for an international standard for greenhouse gas reporting. And this was back in the 1990s. And so together with large corporate partners, people that you might not necessarily associate with wanting to be involved in something like this, people like General Motors and BP, but they also looked at a multitude of stakeholders as well. So the WWF and a number of other NGOs, so Global Climate Change, the Pew Center for Global Climate Change, the Energy Research Institute, like I say, a multitude of stakeholders across all different sort of areas, and they came up with this idea. They needed this common accountancy method, so that it was a standardized method across all of it, so you could really compare across rather than having different ones. And so they came up with this first edition of a corporate standard. So they got together in the late 90s. They published this corporate standard in 2001, and it's been updated for various years, and it really accounts for all of the how companies measure emissions from electricity, energy, accounts for emissions throughout their whole value chain, their supply chain, and it's developed a suite of calculation tools so that companies can measure and calculate it, and see the benefits then of their projects that they're doing. So yes, so it's really kind of the basis for a lot of carbon calculations, and the most prevalent one, which is why I highlight it here. In short, they talk about what are called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, and so it classifies them into these three scopes. And Scope 1 are direct emissions, are there from the from facilities and from entities which are owned or controlled, so emissions that come from the company's owned sources. Scope 2 is emissions which are indirect emissions from the generation of purchased energy, and Scope 3 is everything else. It's all of the indirect emissions not included in Scope 2 that occur within the value chain of the reporting company. So typically Scope 1 and 2 are much easier to work out. Scope 3 much more difficult, and what we typically see is around between 80 and 95, maybe more, percent of the emissions are actually within Scope 3. So a little bit of a deeper sort of dive within that. What do we mean by kind of Scope 1 emissions? So we've got fuel combustion. So if you've got a gas boiler, that would account for your Scope 1 emissions. So fugitive emissions. So if you've got air conditioning units, heating units, and some of the gases, the fluorinated gases or cooling gases escape. So those would be included in your Scope 1. Process emissions, if you've got industrial processes such as chemical reactions or fermentation within manufacturing processes, these would fall underneath Scope 1, and then also emissions from vehicles owned or operated. So moving on to Scope 2, these are your indirect emissions from the purchased energy. Again, these are typically quite simple. It's essentially your energy use. Could also be kind of steam or heating if you buy that, if you've got like a district heat network, something like that. And then on to Scope 3. And these are your supply chain, your kind of emissions. So this is, like I say, the big one. You've got employee commuting. You've got what happens to the products if you're producing products afterwards. So the waste disposal. You've got the business travel. So it's all of the raw materials. It's all of the kind of whole life cycle of the products. Or even within service industry, you know, where you're hosting computers, where your website is. So yeah, a whole range of different things. We're going to take a kind of a quick look at the university scopes 1, 2, and 3, just to kind of give you some insight. Again, some of the examples that we look at as an organisation. So yeah, here you can see that it's the we've got solid fuels, liquid fuels, all of the fuels which are burnt on site, and the refrigerant gases that we mentioned within Scope 1. Scope 2, we've just got our heat purchase and grid electricity. And then Scope 3, we've kind of broken down into this water, waste, travel, commuting. And then there's also things which are actually out of scope. So as part of that, the university created a 12-point action plan, and this kind of looked at across all three scopes, but across these broad areas. And so the aim is to be net zero emissions from direct emissions by 2025 across scope 1 and 2, and then continue to reduce then grid electricity by 20%, mains gas by 25% by 2030. So again, it's just sort of showing this as an overview of the kind of areas that you might want to sort of focus on, or you could focus on, and where we currently focus on as an establishment at the university. So in terms of pathways to net zero, and this idea of a carbon hierarchy, and so this is kind of guided by the carbon management hierarchy prioritization model. It's very similar to the waste hierarchy management model in terms of really emissions. In the first instance, we'd always look to avoid them. If you can't avoid those emissions by kind of not doing the activity in the first place, we look to then reduce them, or look for replacements. Is there alternative ways that we could do things, or not use that material, for example, or not use that process? And then if we really can't avoid, reduce, or replace what's called the residual kind of emissions within a process, then we calculate that those emissions and we offset that. Just looking at another example here, we looked at the university, and now kind of looking at Finisterre. So they are a Cornish clothing manufacturer. And they're a B Corp. They've done a lot of work on their sustainability, and this kind of is just a bit of a kind of process map of where they looked to see all of the information and gather the kind of data from to measure their carbon footprint. So you've got their kind of tier 2 suppliers, which are their transportation, got their tier 1 suppliers, which are where they actually kind of procure their clothing from, and they've got their head office, kind of the office and the warehousing, and all of the various factors which incorporate that. And then onto the stores, where they own some of their own stores, as well as distributing directly and selling sort of wholesale. And then this end of life kind of idea as well, where they're kind of customers, and their customers can return things, or the transport that's needed. So you can kind of see there a bit of a visual kind of map of where then that kind of carbon sitting in the different areas which it's sitting. And again, oh, excuse me, my throat's going dry. Looking at their carbon footprint, what they found when they kind of calculated it is that the total kind of footprint was around nearly 4,000 tons, but 92% of those emissions were actually produced in the supply chain. So that's the materials, the manufacturing, the process, packaging, and that all fell into scope 3, rather than the things that they had direct control over. So it's really interesting, actually. How do you manage those things which are actually indirect to you? And so it's one of the big challenges that we kind of face, but it's really important to kind of ask those questions, and we kind of examine that a little bit more. So there's this video which is, again, looking at the kind of this life cycle of kind of clothing, as we kind of just looked at kind of Finisterre there, and it just really highlights actually even something as simple as a t-shirt, the impact that it has. So I just want to play you this video, and then after that, I think it's about 6 minutes. So we're kind of going to take a look at our own individual carbon footprints after this.
New season, new me.
New free stuff on Foxy Drop too.
Sorry guys, I don't know why it's not loading. Bear with me 2 seconds.
Consider the classic white t-shirt. Annually, we sell and buy 2 billion t-shirts globally, making it one of the most common garments in the world. But how and where is the average t-shirt made? And what's its environmental impact? Clothing items can vary a lot, but a typical t-shirt begins its life on a farm in America, China, or India, where cotton seeds are sown, irrigated, and grown for the fluffy bolls they produce. Self-driving machines carefully harvest these puffs. An industrial cotton gin mechanically separates the fluffy bolls from the seeds, and the cotton lint is pressed into 225-kilogram bales. The cotton plants require a huge quantity of water and pesticides. 2,700 liters of water are needed to produce the average t-shirt, enough to fill more than 30 bathtubs. Meanwhile, cotton uses more insecticides and pesticides than any other crop in the world. These pollutants can be carcinogenic, harm the health of field workers, and damage surrounding ecosystems. Some t-shirts are made of organic cotton, grown without pesticides and insecticides, but organic cotton makes up less than 1% of the 22.7 million metric tons of cotton produced worldwide. Once the cotton bales leave the farm, textile mills ship them to a spinning facility, usually in China or India, where high-tech machines blend, card, comb, pull, stretch, and finally twist the cotton into snowy ropes of yarn called slivers. Then yarns are sent to the mill, where huge circular knitting machines weave them into sheets of rough grayish fabric, treated with heat and chemicals until they turn soft and white. Here, the fabric is dipped into commercial bleaches and azo dyes, which make up the vivid coloring in about 70% of textiles. Unfortunately, some of these contain cancer-causing cadmium, lead, chromium, and mercury. Other harmful compounds and chemicals can cause widespread contamination when released as toxic wastewater in rivers and oceans. Technologies are now so advanced in some countries that the entire process of growing and producing fabric barely touches a human hand, but only up until this point. After the finished cloth travels to factories, often in Bangladesh, China, India, or Turkey, human labor is still required to stitch them up into t-shirts. Intricate work that machines just can't do. This process has its own problems. Bangladesh, for example, which has surpassed China as the world's biggest exporter of cotton t-shirts, employs 4.5 million people in the t-shirt industry, but they typically face poor conditions and low wages. After manufacture, all those t-shirts travel by ship, train, and truck to be sold in high-income countries, a process that gives cotton an enormous carbon footprint. Some countries produce their own clothing domestically, which cuts out this polluting stage. But generally, apparel production accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions. And it's escalating. Cheaper garments and the public's willingness to buy boosted global production from 1994 to 2014 by 400%. to around 80 billion garments each year. Finally, in a consumer's home, the t-shirt goes through one of the most resource-intensive phases of its lifetime. In America, for instance, the average household does nearly 400 loads of laundry per year, each using about 40 gallons of water. Washing machines and dryers both use energy, with dryers requiring 5 to 6 times more than washers. This dramatic shift in clothing consumption over the last 20 years, driven by large corporations and the trend of fast fashion, has cost the environment, the health of farmers, and driven questionable human labor practices. It's also turned fashion into the second largest polluter in the world after oil. But there are things we can do. Consider shopping secondhand. Try to look for textiles made from recycled or organic fabrics. Wash clothes less and line dry to save resources. Instead of throwing them away at the end of their life, donate, recycle, or reuse them as cleaning rags. And finally, you might ask yourself, how many t-shirts and articles of clothing will you consume over your lifetime? And what will be their combined impact on the world? When we produce TED-Ed videos about the environment, we often think about the young people who subscribe to this channel and how unfair it is that you're inheriting environment.
Okay. So yeah, hopefully that was kind of interesting insight
Yeah.
into yeah, just even something as simple as a t-shirt and the kind of implications and that it has and across those kind of three kind of scopes. Just going to pick up on a question that we had. Who is it from, Claire? Adam. So Adam was asking about what does out of scope mean? So when I was looking at the university's footprint and how they calculate it. So some of them are out of scope. So it's when you define your scopes, you literally get to define them as to what you are going to include and what you aren't going to include. So those were elements which were either fell out of the scope of what we were going to include within that. So there might be that they aren't relevant or they don't have an impact or that we don't want to include them because we can't calculate them. So there's a lot of reasons, but basically just out of scope means that they're not going to be included within that footprint, but we are also acknowledging that they are there and do exist as well. So yeah, so hopefully that answers that. So this next section, we are going to look at your own individual kind of carbon footprint. We're going to use a tool from the WWF, and it's relatively kind of simplistic tool. So it just asks a few questions of you, and then it kind of gives you a number at the end of it, and gives you some kind of insight as well. Claire's just going to put a link in the chat. So if you kind of click through to that, or you can kind of scan if you want to do it on your phone. The QR code on the left will take you to the website. They also have an app that you can download as well, which kind of takes you through the same process. The app's is interesting because it also it gives you some ways in which you can then kind of do things, or what measures you can take afterwards. In order to reduce your carbon footprint. So it's kind of a bit more of a kind of companion thing, and they kind of gamify it as well to make it a little bit more exciting, a bit more interesting. So for the kind of this sort of exercise, just kind of working out the footprint, I think it would be worth just going to the website. But if it is something then you're interested in looking at further, then the app is pretty good at doing that. So what I would like you to do for the next sort of 10 minutes or so, kind of go through that process. And again, once you have kind of completed it, what I'd like you to do is just kind of let me know in the chat that it's that you've done it. And then after that, we're going to have a short break. So like I say, what I'll do is I'll Give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, so hopefully everyone's had a chance to do that. What I will say is time for a kind of a quick comfort break. So if you've not quite finished, then just use some of that time to kind of finish off your carbon footprint, and then we've got a sort of a 10-minute or so break. Grab a cup of tea. Yeah, go to the toilet if you need to, and then if we reconvene here about 11:10. And then when we come back, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at my carbon footprint. I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to, again, a small sort of poll to see what your guys came out with. And then we're going to look at this sort of novel concept again of this carbon handprint and the actions that we can take to help reduce our footprints, both as organisations and as individuals. So yeah, I will see you back here in about 10 minutes. Thanks, guys. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you. Yeah, so hopefully everyone's feeling refreshed and managed to do what they need to do in those 10 minutes. Hopefully you haven't got dragged into emails or sort of firefighting and yeah, kind of get your full attention again for the next sort of session. So like I said, we're going to kind of look at my sort of my kind of carbon footprint, what number I kind of come out with. So yeah, I think everyone sort of should be back with us. Let me just check that quickly. 2 seconds. Okay, so yes, my carbon footprint. So here we go. And it's relatively high. So I've seen some of you have sort of shared yours in the chat. If you feel comfortable doing that, you can share yours. If not, I'm going to launch a poll in a minute to sort of see if where people are, so you can do that anonymously. So 12.5 tons is my footprint, and yeah, this is well over the target. So the average footprint, as you can see there, and I'm sure you'll have seen in yours, 8.8 tons for the UK, and really the world average is 6.3 tons, and I think really the idea is that we kind of get that to about 5 tons in order to make that what the kind of planet can sustain. So yes, mine was predominantly on my travel. So a couple of holidays that will really kind of push that way up. My home, I mean, again, like I said, it's a really simplistic calculator. So it's just to get a number, just to give you a bit of a flavor and idea. There's different ones out there that kind of do it in a bit more detail. So I mean, I live in a kind of eco home-ish. It's all electricity, but it's got solar panels and an air source heat pump. And food, I make quite conscious choices around kind of what I eat. I really don't buy too much stuff, I don't think, although probably more than I need, I would suggest. So yeah, so that's the sort of split of kind of how I look carbon footprint wise. So this is me kind of all laid bare. So what I'll do now, I'll launch the quiz, and that will just again give us a flavour of where you guys are. So just a couple of questions on this one. Should be able to see it. So if you, like I say, if you don't want to put it in the chat, and again, please fill in the quiz, because then it kind of gives us that insight as well. When we kind of look at the numbers, again, it's all anonymous. I can't see who it is that's answered this. So yeah, a real range there. Cool. Okay. So I'll leave that up for 30 seconds more or so, just to let everyone submit their answers. And yeah, we're sort of really seeing a range across there, sort of only one over 20 tons, but the majority kind of sat in the middle where you'd expect it to be. One person done really well, 1 to 5 tons. What we did find as well is we've done this with across a range of students and a range of different groups and different cohorts, and actually that 1 to 5 tons really hard to get into. I mean, we were dealing with a lot of students who lived in Africa, and even their only kind of real contributor was kind of their flights, so they just had very low CO2 emissions from their kind of day-to-day life when they were at home. So yeah, a massive kind of impact. Yeah, interesting, Jackie. That flights, yeah, I see that you want to catch the ferry, more economical, but it's actually just much cheaper to fly. And I think we see that all the time with trains as well, a massive issue, and that we've seen in France. They've banned, I think it's flights under 2 hours, or flights to places if you can get there in under 2 hours by road. So I think they're looking at kind of doing a similar sort of flight ban in the UK. So that would kind of that domestic kind of travel, but it's just trains are way too expensive compared to even sort of driving or catching a plane. So it's much more convenient as well to kind of to do those things. So it just needs to be the kind of transportation system does really need to be looked at in terms of ways which we can do it. I mean, especially being where we are. So I'm actually sat in Cornwall today, but around Plymouth and the southwest and kind of rural communities, kind of public transport is very, very difficult to do. So, okay, yeah, thanks for doing that. So travel's the main one, right? So when we looked at those kind of where there's different sectors as well, where the greenhouse gas emissions come from, travel is a massive one. Energy used for travel and heating your homes and things like that. So yeah, okay, thanks. Appreciate you doing that. What I'll do is I'll sort of share those results as well. So hopefully you can see those. So as you can see, majority of people kind of sat at that 6 to 10 ton, and they kind of a longer sort of tail down within the 11 to 15 and then 15 to 20, and then the vast majority of people, 67%, people's largest contributor is travel. So yeah, thanks for doing that. So before we kind of look at kind of what we can do about these carbon footprints, one thing that always seemed like a bit of an abstract concept to me is what does a ton of carbon actually look like? So I kind of included this slide just with a couple of examples, just so you can really get your head around it, because like I say, it's a bit of a weird one. Oh, a ton of carbon, like what is that? Is that small, big? So it's as you can see it there next to a double-decker bus or a house. So it's a 10-meter sphere. It's about a 7-meter, nearly 8-meter sort of cube. And as you can see, there's a lady stood outside. I can't remember her name, but outside a climate conference, and that is an inflatable equivalent of what a ton of carbon looks like at atmospheric pressure. So just to kind of a bit of an insight about that. So here's a quote again from a guy called Herbert Spencer. There he is. He's got some nice old lamb chop sideburns going on. So he said the great aim of education is not knowledge, not just seeking to find things out, but actually action. Like, what can we do about it? So it's all very well you kind of understanding all of the information that we've spoken about this morning. What's the purpose of that if you're not actually going to do anything? So now we're going to focus on what is it that you can do and really kind of drive that action forward, so that we're in a better position, basically. So introducing this handprint concept. And so this handprint is like I say, a novel approach to carbon footprint reduction through the lens of a handprint. So we often talk about a footprint, and a footprint is something, backwards looking, often perceived as sort of negative, and in the past, whereas we're trying to convey the fact that this is a handprint which is forward focused, really action based, and it's a real positive, and each fingerprint represents a different point or a question, and at least a much more holistic understanding, and it can also form the basis of an action plan as an organisation, and as an individual as well. So we're going to touch upon that and explore this handprint concept together. So what does it look like? What do we mean when we say this sort of handprint? So really, we've got these 5 sort of points, as you might expect from a handprint kind of concept. So we've got this thumbprint, and that's really where we focus on the awareness, on knowledge. We can't do anything about it, like we said, without having that awareness, without having that knowledge. So really kind of building up that awareness. Then the finger, or the index fingerprint. We've got the individual. What can you do sort of personally within your kind of sphere of influence? And then your ring finger, your middle fingerprint. within your organization, we kind of talk about these spheres of influence. So within the individual context, within an organizational context, what can we do? So that's that kind of middle fingerprint. And then your ring finger, looking at the local context, actually wider outside of you as an individual, without wider than the organization, actually this sort of local context and a wider kind of thing. And then we kind of look at then this vision as well, and we kind of expand that kind of actually what does that mean? What does it feel like? And this idea of kind of using your imagery to actually understand and imagine a better future, and that can really be very powerful in driving action and driving change as well. So we're going to take each one of these in turn now. So we've got the thumbprint, that awareness and understanding. So really the impact of individual actions on carbon, and how conscious we are of our daily kind of choices, their environmental impact, and really just these series of questions. How does climate change affect you personally? Does it affect you personally? Is it something that you kind of think about or consider, or does it not? It doesn't impact your day-to-day life. So just really having an understanding. Do you make different choices about what you do or what you eat, for instance? So how does climate change affect you personally, and how does it affect your organization? So just take a minute or two just to write down kind of very quickly, just how does climate change affect you personally? Write that down in the chat. And then also, how does that affect your organization? Does it affect your organization? Again, we started today looking at some of the business risks or some of the global risks. Is that something that's going to impact your organization in the future, or you personally in the future? Or is it not? You're not there yet. It's not actually having an impact. So I could ask you to kind of think about those two questions at the end there. How does climate change affect you personally? And how does climate change affect your organization? And pop those answers down in the chat for me, please. Okay, so yeah, thanks for sharing, Emily. Yeah, children's future, that's always quite a pertinent one, when people are thinking about their impact. It's not necessarily just them, but it's their children as well. Yeah, Mandy, her home, everything, everywhere. Yeah, 2 pets. Yeah, it's exactly. Lots of stuff, lots of things to consider. Yeah, thinking about the weather, and as a gardener, how unpredictable it is. Yeah, I found that I didn't get anywhere near as much out in the garden as I was hoping to this year. It was just very wet. Yeah, Cara, mental health, being anxious. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, okay, guys, thanks for sharing that. December. Yeah, exactly. Resource scarcity, water. We're going to see, I think, in the future, lots of things which will impact it in that way. So yeah, so really building that awareness in the first instance. So then moving on to that first fingerprint, as an individual, the latest IPCC report kind of really highlights that actually individuals can have an impact. So and it's we're sort of very small within that organisation, but as a together we can drive big impacts and actually be focused for those sort of demand type drivers. And looking at kind of ways in which we can do that. So, reducing energy consumption across kind of turning off lights. I always have my sort of parents' words ringing in my ears about switching lights off and things like that. So it can be a huge, significant reduction in carbon footprints. Again, using like turning off electronic devices, energy efficient appliances. We've seen the kind of everyone's like from fridges and kettles. Any electronic device now kind of has that A to sort of F kind of energy rating on it as well. So that could be a kind of choices that we make on that basis. And switching to renewable energy sources, so it's not something that we can do kind of relatively easily. Kind of moving to green tariffs and consider installing solar panels if that's something that's available to you. It might not always be if you're in a rented accommodation or if you live in a flat. It's not necessarily an option, or if it's cost prohibitive as well. So, but again, talking to your energy supplier and choosing a green tariff often doesn't cost you any more, but then you know that the energy is coming from renewable sources rather than from kind of brown sources or sort of gas and fossil fuel sources. Other things as well to consider is there's like an organisations like Ripple, and they offer the ability to be able to buy into sort of solar farms or wind farms or wind specific wind turbines, and then they've got connections with energy suppliers, and essentially where you've kind of invested in that, then that kind of comes, you own part of it, and that then at the energy pricing is removed from your bill, and it happens like natively. It's sort of very low touch, but you just see that kind of reduction in cost across that. So again, if you do live in a flat or do live in rented accommodation, something like that, that could be an option in terms of actually owning part of that kind of renewable network. We're also seeing a rising kind of district and local kind of heating and electricity kind of networks as well. So this sort of decentralization of the grid. Again, looking to reuse, reduce, recycle, that kind of waste hierarchy kind of mantra. Looking for options which have actually got lower packaging, reusing items where we can, and recycling where we can. Again, we've got pretty good recycling throughout the UK. And because of the doorstep kind of collections, just ensuring that we're doing all that we can to do that. Yes, and it just means that it's not going to landfill, can be reused as well. I know there's been a lot of press about, is it recycling isn't necessarily the answer. We have to tackle it at its source, but in the short term, we're in these systems that exist, so we have to kind of be doing all that we can to recycle, and then also striving to be in a system where actually do we need the packaging, and can we look at it in a more kind of larger kind of way, kind of zooming out in a systems-based approach. How do we get around? So again, transportation in terms of that energy is a huge part. Majority of us had transportation as a significant contributor to our footprints. So is that because we're driving? Is that because we're taking flights? Is there the possibility to offset the emissions from our flights? How do we do that? When we're buying a new car, I'm looking at it at the moment, and it's very frustrating because I can, it's nearly twice the price to buy an electric car as it is to buy a diesel alternative in terms of kind of monthly cost. And I find it crazy to my mind. Why is that? Why is it that it's so much more expensive? The cars are almost, there's not much difference in the cost of the cars, but the incentives are kind of for EVs are gone, and it just seems kind of crazy that is that is where we're at with it. And I'm someone who's minded to kind of choose electric over a diesel car. But there's, you know, people that making this decision purely based on a cost basis. It's a no-brainer for them. Why would they choose an electric vehicle when they can have a fossil fuel alternative for half the price? And that's, you know, even if they're a kind of an EV advocate, it's a very difficult decision to make. So that's on EVs. But again, public transport, we kind of touched upon, difficult in the southwest, but you know, can we catch the train? How are we getting around? You know, actually flying is actually better than driving somewhere if you're on your own in a car for the distance of it, because there's so many more people in that plane as well. So kind of sometimes a common misconception is that, you know, flying is the worst of the worst. It's not always the case. If the alternative is you driving all that way on your own in a car. So again, thinking about these kind of common misconceptions that can be there, and also looking at carpooling, can we share cars as well? Again, looking at diet, again, one of the most prominent things and often one of the most controversial, let's say. People love their food and people don't necessarily want to be told what to do. It's very close to their heart. People people that have farming connections and ties, they want to kind of preserve that kind of way of life as well. So, but reducing kind of the amount of red meat, the amount of animals that you eat and have it within your diet can often be a massive contributor to reducing your footprint. And so that's something that I do. I'm kind of like what I define as a flexitarian kind of diet. So I eat red meat, but I definitely cut down the amount of red meat that I've eaten. And I definitely do veganuary. So try and, I think for me, it was more a mindset shift in terms of actually what does a meal kind of constitutes. I kind of wrap my main meal planning around the actual meat, whereas actually thinking about what vegetables we can do and meals that we can make. And once we've kind of got an established set of kind of different food menus that we kind of go to, actually made it a lot easier. So just doing veganuary was good in terms of getting some really good recipes that were delicious, that were kind of had vegetables as the basis. So that was something that I do, which was really helpful in doing that. And again, I was kind of a huge sort of red meat advocate, and sort of having to shift that away. It's sometimes it can be difficult. But again, it's better for the climate, it's better health-wise, and it's also, you know, in terms of animal welfare, it's obviously a much better thing too. So another thing to consider. Another one that sometimes is kind of overlooked is screening your finances. So again, this stat is pretty crazy. So during the 7 years following the Paris Agreement, the world's top 60 private sector banks have pumped $5.5 trillion into fossil fuels. And so we see a lot of fossil fuel funding still coming from banks. And they're kind of retail banks that people then tend to have their bank accounts with. HSBC, Barclays, Bank of America is a big one, less relevant for people here. So it's thinking about things like that again. And there's a very easy way. Go to bank.green and see how well your bank is doing in relation to that. And there's also another site called Make My Money Matter. And again, they're looking to transform the financial system, and they focus predominantly on pensions. So is your pension funding, where's your pension money? Is it investing in BP and Shell? And if it is, are you happy about that? Or, you might say, actually, no, I want to have the returns of that. I want to have the security of having my money there. It might be something, people don't necessarily tend to know where their money's invested. So it was about the transparency and about the openness of it, so that people are aware in the first instance whether or not you want to move it or not. Again, it's something which is kind of highly emotive, as it is with food and money, kind of things which are very close to people's hearts. The last one, in terms of that individual piece, is that kind of activism, and I don't mean necessarily going on a march or throwing soup at a painting or shutting down the M25. Although you can do those things if that's how passionately you feel about it. But it's about just writing to your MP. It's about engaging with local groups. It's about activism takes many different forms. So it's about how can you actually engage and be active if it's something that you do feel that you do want to get involved in. So moving on now to that second fingerprint, that middle kind of finger, and so that organisation and what you can do within your kind of organisational context. So really, the first kind of bit is just asking the questions whether or not does your organisation have an environmental policy in the first instance? Do you know where they stand on climate change? Do you know if there will be climate change impacts that will affect your organisation? And is it something that's on their radar? Is it on their agenda? Is it something that's spoken about at kind of a management level or a leadership level? So the first bit really from an organisational perspective is just asking that question within your team and wider organisation. Is this something that's important to the organisation? And then looking at a number of kind of areas within your organisation. So are there procurement? So how are we buying things for the organisation, and do we have sort of green and sustainable and ethical kind of policies in place to be able to buy these things, and if not, how difficult would that be to implement? Again, looking at kind of life cycle and circularity. So really considering kind of what happens to the product if you're manufacturing products. What happens to them after they kind of ship to the customer? Do we just sort of forget about that? And is there a way that we could actually kind of recycle that or look to improve that kind of process? And again, where are we buying our raw materials from as well? Okay, so really looking at that kind of supply chain and that kind of life cycle and how can that be improved? Other things, again, often one that's looked over and can be kind of a significant issue depending on the significant impact depending on the business, is this digital transformation. This one is across even manufacturers, but for service industries as well, is where are you kind of hosting these things? If you've got like an app or a digital platform, where's your website hosted? Where's Teams hosted? Where is Zoom hosted? Have you made green decisions around that, or are they not happening? Also, how are you having meetings? Are you all going to the office? So utilizing these digital tools, and again, one of the things that kind of came out of COVID was actually work is something that I do rather than a place that I go. So this idea that actually do you need to go there, or can you do the same quality and have that same level of work and productivity from home and not have to travel in and kind of, there's a lot of other issues that come around that, but purely from a kind of environmental perspective, using that is going to be a real kind of benefit. So not having to travel to meetings, especially for maybe prospective meetings as well, meeting new clients. Is it necessary to actually meet them face to face? So looking at that as an issue. So now, kind of that's the organisational bit. Looking at the local context. So again, within that organisation a bit, again, we'll just kind of go back and think about within trade bodies as well. Where can we go to get information from what the organisation's doing, and what are kind of other kind of peers as well? Maybe kind of think like what are your competitors doing, what are your peers doing, what are other people on your industrial estates doing potentially, and also what are your trade bodies doing? So if you have like a professional body which oversees the kind of governance of your kind of practice or your profession, what are they saying about this? Have they got insight, or have they got knowledge which is very sector specific or trade specific, to help you kind of guide you through that. So again, looking at the local context, again, looking at these within this idea of actually a local government level, and again, broadening that horizon. So what's happening within the region, what's happening within kind of like then sort of nationally as well. So it's kind of looking at these, and again, looking at those things within the sectors. Is there things that are moving? Are you seeing procurement kind of move, like we saw with plastics, a huge shift away from plastics? We're seeing single-use plastic as a massive detriment to waste. How do we recycle that? We can't, recycle our way out of that issue, so we need to sort of systemically sort of change that. And so, yeah, kind of asking these questions about kind of what the things are actually happening, and what customers are asking for as well. So sometimes it's sort of supply led, you really want to drive this forward. Other times it's actually, am I losing customers as a result of not delivering on something, or are they asking for something? Is there a gap or a niche in that market where I could actually be fulfilling something by being more sustainable? So we're going to look now at a bit of a local context, specifically around Plymouth, and so what's happening in this arena within Plymouth. So the Net Zero Action Plan is a 3-year comprehensive plan that was aimed to reduce Plymouth City Council's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's aligned with their Net Zero Plymouth Challenge. So they're looking in Plymouth to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. Excuse me. All right, just have a... So we know we're kind of blessed in the southwest with this rugged coastline, this beautiful kind of scenic landscape, which is what's drawn so many of us to here. And really kind of looking at kind of how can we shape the future of this peninsula that we kind of live in. So for the next few slides, I'm going to kind of go on this journey, explore Plymouth's ambition and their endeavour to kind of get to net zero by 2030. And really, it starts back in March 2019, so about 5 years ago, when the council made a historic decision to declare a climate emergency. And you might be aware that lots of areas, regions, organisations, they've declared a climate emergency, and they pledged to lead the charge in combating climate change. And that's where they set this ambitious goal by 2030. So if you remember, the national target is by 2050, and again, this one's by 2030. So really ambitious. It's very soon. It's 6 years away. So kind of a bit of the background to it, which kind of really touched upon. It's the urgency of this commitment, and it's really climate change is really posing an existential risk and a threat to the planet, and action needs to be taken swiftly and decisively, which is why they were kind of striving for this 2030 goal. So what we've done is they've looked in the first part to the overview and understand the scope of the challenge ahead. So they look at their current emission status, and since 2019, the council has been diligently monitoring their greenhouse gas emissions. They've been tracking the progress and identifying key areas for improvement. It's with this clear understanding that their baseline emissions can be charted and then plot the course to a sort of sustainable future. So the coverage is really sort of central to this net zero action plan. Again, 3-year strategy, and it's very specific actions and targets for reducing the emissions. So it covers 2 main areas, and that's reducing emissions from all council-owned facilities and services, but also using their influence, again, that sphere of influence of catalysing citywide transitions to net zero, and addressing their own emissions, leveraging the influence to drive broader change, paving the way for a greener, more sustainable future. So how have they done this? Again, we looked at this slide earlier, it's really about that carbon management hierarchy. So that's what's at the heart of the plan, and a real prioritization model to guide action towards emission reduction. And so by prioritizing these actions to avoid, reduce, replace and offset, it maximizes the impacts of the interventions which are being planned. So it really underscores the importance of focusing on measures with lasting benefits and aligning these with the overarching goal of achieving carbon neutrality. So what are the key priorities? Here we're looking at these kind of 6, and really it's about curtailing the emissions from the transport. Again, transport really high up there, really big contributor to emissions, and we kind of seen that on that pie chart. Everyone's sort of footprints sort of on the call, and then also we're seeing it time and time again. So it's a really, really big issue, one that kind of we need to tackle, and it's a really difficult one. How do we actually do that? And then reducing emissions from the construction and buildings, from the built environment, so insulating them better and making them more efficient. Again, fostering a significant shift towards low carbon energy generation. So looking at how do we do that within our local kind of context. We've got a heat distribution network which is going to be being worked on currently. Again, looking at responsible consumption and waste reduction. So this is again one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So aligning with those more broader, wide global contexts, and then engage that whole community in this net zero mission. So for lots of people, they don't understand it, as Ian touched upon, this messy middle of people that don't necessarily believe it, or they don't see the relevance and the importance of it. So how do we engage those people to drive changes so that we can have really long-lasting and meaningful impact? And then lastly, kind of employing these strategies for unavoidable emissions and looking to address them kind of comprehensively. So again, those action areas really kind of form those 3 kind of, those 5 areas: the transport, building, heat and power, consumption, waste, and behaviour change. We're going to quickly look at each of those in turn. So transport, there's lots of initiative to decarbonise the vehicle fleet. So from electric buses and gas buses, improving and activating active travel, such as kind of e-bikes as well, and bolstering the public transport infrastructure. In terms of power and heat, so offering kind of grants for people to get the infrastructure that they need, so whether or not that is air source heat pumps, and again education around what air source heat pumps mean, insulation as well. So it's about how do we kind of do that for the wider community, but then also looking at their own council-owned buildings and infrastructure, how are they kind of distributing that? Are they using the most efficient energy, and having those kind of those trade-offs and those business decisions around how do they heat and power their buildings? So looking at then responsible consumption and waste, reducing indirect emissions, Scope 3, optimizing procurement practices. So how are they buying things? Like I said at the beginning of that kind of organizational finger, it's like, how are we buying things? What's the best way to buy the things that we need? And just by asking the question can often kind of mean that we're having more meaningful conversations about the sustainability, put it on more people's radar, and using that purchasing power from the council, which is huge purchasing power, into the multi-millions of pounds in terms of the contracts that they have, and utilising having sustainability questions within their tendering processes can help to do that within their procurements, and then also minimising waste, and then yes, these circular economy principles as well. And then we're also looking at behaviour change. So how do we get people to change? What is the normative things that are going to be happening, and the way that people kind of think? So utilising programmes to instigate these societal shifts. So they've got Climate Connections, which is a kind of group where they kind of have social meetups. People kind of get together, real sort of sustainability meetups, and really kind of push this message and help answer kind of questions that people have around sustainability within the region and within the city. So the benefits are beyond just the kind of climate benefits, and we kind of see this with like some of the green prescribing, but it's beyond mitigating climate change. It yields so many co-benefits that align with the council's broader objectives, and these are things such as improved air quality, enhanced public health, creation of green jobs, and the reduction of energy costs. I think there's often a misconception that kind of like green or sustainable is kind of that green tax which is associated with it, but it's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it's actually cheaper or more efficient to do things, and that has a sustainability basis for it as well. And so by pursuing this climate action, Plymouth not only safeguards its environment, but it also fosters that economic resilience and that sense of social well-being as well. Again, there's lots of kind of complementary initiatives. So the council kind of spearheading a lot of these to address climate change and enhance environmental sustainability. So they encompass diverse areas such as nature conservation, climate resilient urban planning, which is something which really, it's something which not even necessarily considered about. We're seeing a lot of the kind of the middle thoroughfare in town that's been dug up, and the amount of work that's gone in there, and that's kind of flood prevention. There's big tanks that are being put in underground in order to prevent, in the future and mitigate that flood risk. And again, community engagement and also the support for energy efficient housing as well. So there's lots and lots of things which are happening, excuse me, in the local area. And in terms of fairness and equity, and again, Ian touched upon this in his video quite early on. And this was really about then actually how equitable it is and how fair is this to be doing for everyone. So it's who's got the ability to pay, where the funding, where are the, it's basically ensuring the fairness, and it's integral to the agenda. So we recognise that there are disparities and there's resource access and vulnerabilities, and so what the council are really trying to do is make this inclusive throughout the whole process, and they kind of target those interventions to those people that need it most, and they prioritise then the green skills and the development of those, and give access to people from across all of the different communities, so in order so they have access to it, and strive to create just a real just transition for a sustainable future. And so that's really kind of what that's all about. So this next slide is again a short video, and it is from a lady called Emily Reed, and she is just presenting the Devon Climate Emergency and their action plan. So again, just a short video, again hearing it kind of from the horse's mouth. So just to kind of give you some of the local kind of the context that we're kind of seeing in the local area. So bear with me 2 seconds and I'll get this video up.
Hello, I'm Emily Reed, and I provide the Secretariat to the Devon Climate Emergency Partnership, where we're working to create a resilient net zero carbon Devon where people and nature thrive. So I wanted to tell you about the partnership and the strategies that the partnerships work to develop, and how your organisation might play a part in helping to deliver those and achieve net zero. So, as you can see, the partnerships are a really wide-ranging group of organisations. It includes all the local authorities in Devon, as well as private sector companies such as National Grid, South West Water, and third sector organisations as well. So the partnership is working together to achieve net zero by 2050 at the latest and improve the resilience of Devon's environment, because we know that we're already seeing the impacts of climate change. So we need to prepare for a warmer world. So originally, when the partnership was formed in 2019 and came together to declare a climate emergency, a response group was formed with senior representation of all of the organisations, and then a tactical group that has all the climate change officers and their parallel colleagues from the other organisations to work together to really share information and deliver the development of the strategies and outcomes together. There's 2 working groups that were set up, a net zero task force that was independent, chaired by the Patrick Devine-Bright at the University of Exeter, and also a climate impacts group to work on adaptation, chaired now by the Environment Agency. So those 2 groups were tasked with producing a Devon carbon plan and a climate adaptation strategy for the region. So I'll tell you a bit about how the Devon carbon plan was developed first. There was an evidence gathering phase held by the Net Zero Task Force, and some of that took place in Plymouth at the Sustainability Hub. So there's a series of essentially roundtable meetings, bringing different stakeholders together to look at the barriers that needed to be overcome to achieve net zero and what we needed to do that. There was a youth parliament event to ensure that younger generations had input into the development of the plan, and also a climate assembly where we sent out 14,000 letters across the county to get a demographically representative group of 70 people together to look at the more challenging aspects of how we decarbonise. So looking at things like the role of wind turbines and how we get people out of their cars. This was held online due to the pandemic, but still really successful. So together, the Devon Carbon Plan has 8 objectives: to phase out fossil fuels, minimise energy consumption, make sure communities are engaged, capture carbon from the burning of any fossil fuels that can't be avoided, minimise fugitive greenhouse gas emissions of things like leaking refrigerants, and make sure that we've got resilient economies with the finance they need for the transition, that we're using resources in a circular manner, and that we're maximising those opportunities for carbon storage. So you can see the final Devon Carbon Plan on the website. There's some quick read versions, so you don't have to dig into all the detail, but if you also want more of the detail, then there's some summary and full version. You can see the chapters on the screen there. So it goes into cross-cutting themes, economy, resources, energy, both environment, transport, food and sea, and then how we actually make the plan a reality. So yeah, do take a look and then pick out the actions that your organisation can take a lead on, because there are lots that are applicable to small businesses and individuals. As I said, one of the groups within the partnership was tasked to develop a climate adaptation strategy, and the adaptation strategy is regional rather than just for Devon. We're collaborating with Cornwall, Nails or Scilly. So the group, the Climate Impacts Group, that's developed this strategy with consultants RSK ADAS, includes local authority representatives, but also people like West Country Rivers Trust, the Environment Agency and universities. The strategy sets out the risks and opportunities that we know of for the region from climate change, and that's very closely mirrors the national climate change risk assessment. There's an adaptation plan that sets out how do we create the conditions for everyone to adapt to climate change together. And then a more focused action plan that says what we really need to focus on in collaboration with each other over the next 2 to 3 years. So I won't go into detail, but you can see here some of the impacts that we anticipate and are already seeing from climate change. And this is what the strategy looks to address. So it picks out the main impact themes of flooding, extreme heat, sea level rise and coastal erosion that accompanies that, as well as reduced water availability. And similar to the national climate risk assessment, it looks at the sectors of the natural environment, including farming, infrastructure, health and built environment, cross-cutting and international dimensions such as migration and trade and business and industry. So I recommend that you have a look at the risk register, you think about which risks your organisation might be most exposed to and the kind of things that you can do to make your business more resilient to business interruptions from those impacts. There's resources to help you do that on the website. So do take a look, and if there's anything that you know of that we've missed, let us know. So now that the Devon Carbon Plan has been completed, that group has dissolved, and we've actually got a climate task force that brings together an overview of adaptation and mitigation, and acts as a critical friend to us, reviewing reports on a regular basis and feeding back into the response group with recommendations. And you can see minutes and details of these groups on our website. And the climate impacts group continues to meet on a monthly basis and reviews clusters of risks and actions in the action plan every month to ensure that progress is being made on the climate adaptation strategy. So there's more information on the adaptation work at climateresponse.org.uk, and then you can check out the carbon plan at devonclimateemergency.org.uk, including stories of how Devon's making action, making progress against the action plan. Do also follow us on social media. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So yeah, as you can see, there's a lot happening within that kind of those two kind of regional kind of contexts, both obviously the Plymouth one within Devon and then that wider Devon context where there's things that are being done which you may or may not know about, which are really kind of helping and looking at the impact of climate change and how these things are going to be impacting us in terms of the sort of mitigation, and then also that adaptation as well. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you. So we're kind of moving on now to the kind of the final kind of stage of this vision, this handprint, and really this is about kind of using your imagination to actually imagine in a kind of a better world. And the reason that we do this is because the research shows us that actually using imagery, using your imagination to look forward and see this better future, and see what it feels like, see what it smells like, see what it tastes like. It really has the benefit of actually meaning that we kind of stick with the goals that we're looking at. So I just want you to kind of consider for the next sort of probably spend about 5 or 6 minutes on this, and there's sort of 3 questions on this slide, and then the next slide's got another 3 questions. So I think just really consider that. What is your vision of net zero? What does that actually mean to you? And think about it in that kind of context, from that kind of individual perspective of like, what does it look like? What does it feel like in your home? Does it mean that you're doing things in a different way? Are you buying things in a different way? Is your diet changed? Are you moving? Are you putting solar panels on? Are you driving an EV car? Just really kind of think about that. Really kind of let yourself kind of go, and if it helps, kind of invite you to kind of shut your eyes and really take a few minutes to kind of think about actually what does that look and feel like in my home, and then also apply that same thought process. What does it feel like in my workplace? Will I still be driving to work? Will I be catching the bus? Will I be going to somewhere different to work? Because I want to change careers, because I want to work for somewhere which is sort of net zero. So just again, think about those sort of two questions. What does it feel like in your home? And also kind of what does it feel like in your workplace? I'll give you a kind of a minute or two to think about that, and then I'll move on to the next sort of questions. If you feel you kind of want to share that, you don't have to, but if you do want to share that in the chat, then by all means, please feel free to kind of post those sort of feelings. Okay, so the next kind of couple of a few questions, kind of three more questions to think about is what words would you use to describe a positive vision for the world in 100 years time? Are we thriving? Is it difficult? What is it? Have we achieved net zero? Are we at war? So, a positive vision, sorry, not a war, but it's a positive vision for 100 years time. And a couple more kind of sort of more, I suppose, positive questions. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? So if you knew you weren't going to fail, what is it that you would do? And what is the impact you would like to create in the world? So is it something within sort of sustainability, or is it wider? Do you want to be a TikTok star, or do you want to be something, what legacy do you want to lead or leave in the world? So just think about those things. And I think really these kind of questions are trying to get you to think about the future. And as Emily mentioned about, thinking about if you've got children, then what kind of future will they have, and what kind of future will their sort of children have as well. And kind of this idea of being a good ancestor and really looking to the future and kind of considering what we would like it to look like for future generations, and how you can be kind of prevalent and active in doing that. I'll give you sort of 30 seconds more to kind of consider those three questions. And after that will be the final quiz of the session. Okay, so quiz number 3. So this has got 5 questions in it, and It focuses on kind of some of what we've just been talking about. I think it's predominantly around the Plymouth Net Zero Challenge. So hopefully you're all paying attention. So again, it's just a bit of fun. It's just to kind of see how engaged you guys are. So yeah, please, if you don't know the answers, just give it a stab, give it a guess, and I will leave this up for a couple of minutes. Like I say, 5 questions, and then we will look to review the answers. So there's just a couple of more pieces after this quiz. So there's another interactive element, and then a Q&A session as well. Okay. See, the majority of you have answered that. A few more sort of answers coming in. Thanks for your participation. A few more seconds. Okay, gonna end that one now. Okay, guys, so you should be able to see the results up there now. So what is the main goal of Plymouth City Council Net Zero Action Plan? So it is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So yeah, for 2050 is for the national net zero target, but for the Plymouth target, it's actually more ambitious than that. So it's by 2030. So well done. Majority have got that one right, 70%. Excuse me. So question number 2, which prioritization model guides the overall approach? So we touched upon this a couple of times. So it is the carbon management hierarchy. So again, majority of you guys getting that right, so well done. Question number 3, excuse me. What are the key priorities identified in the Net Zero Challenge? So yes, it's well done. It is cutting emissions from travel, construction, energy. So yeah, again, well done. I think most of you have got that one. 80% odd have got that right. Question number 4, what is the wider benefits from the council's climate action efforts? So again, great. It's yeah, creation of green jobs. Everyone's got that right. And what does the thumb represent on the handprint concept? So the thumb was the first bit. That was the awareness. So again, the majority of you got that right. So, yes, well done. It's going in. So yeah, thanks for participating in that. So we're going to move on now to it's a bit more of a kind of like an action plan. So based on those sort of 3 sort of spheres of influence, looking at the individual on an individual basis, so say looking at it as an organization, and then also kind of a wider kind of context for like regional, kind of local area, or even kind of national, if that's kind of the scope of kind of your ambition. What I'd like you to do is click on the link. Claire's going to post the link to what's called a Miro board, which is an interactive kind of engagement tool. So it will take you to kind of like a whiteboard, and it's an interactive way that you can, if you're not familiar with this, pick up the kind of post-it notes, which are down to one side, and you can just click and drag these. And I want you to fill them in and sort of build your action plan around what you kind of can do as an individual in the short term, in the midterm, which is sort of 1 to 2 months, and in the longer term, and kind of do that for as an individual, as an organization, and then within that kind of local or regional context. And don't feel like you need to fill in every single box and fill it with all post-its. It might be something that you're like, you know what, I'm not going to do anything in my regional context or organization. I'm just going to focus on as an individual, or it might be something that you're going to do as an organization, but you're not going to do it for 1 or 2 months. So don't feel like you need to fill every single box. But if you want to, by all means do. So yeah, grab a post-it and yeah, start sort of typing away. The post-it note should sort of change sort of size as you do it. Yes, so great, and I will head over to the Miro now, and I will share that with you for those that potentially maybe can't get on there or struggling. And I will share that with you. Okay, great. I can see that you guys are busy whirling away. So that's if you're not in there yet, this is what it will look like. And so one thing to mention is you click and drag is with your right mouse click like normal, and then if you want to move and navigate around, you can use the right click to kind of pick up the board and move it around, and then zoom in and out as well. So I can kind of zoom in. So again, this sort of activity, we're looking to probably spend probably the next sort of 7 or 8 minutes on, I would have thought, and I'll kind of gauge it once I sort of see the activity sort of die down, once people have finished putting their notes on there. So and as we're going, I'll probably just read a few out as we once they're up there, and share that with you, just so that we're not all sat in silence. Right, and so the reason that we kind of do this as well in this kind of way of doing, hopefully it's a bit more engaging, a bit more kind of like as if we were in the room, where we're able to kind of grab post-it notes and kind of have this interactive sort of piece, but also in a peer learning kind of environment and group, and where we kind of want people to introduce each other, build this kind of community of practice where people are engaged and understanding about these sort of sustainability challenges. I think it's really helpful to actually look at what others are doing and say, oh, you know, that's a really good idea. Maybe I hadn't thought of that, or maybe I could do that, something similar. So that's sort of the reason for doing it in this way, and just so it's a sharing of sort of best practice and looking at what others are doing, to help then to help feel sort of positive about it, because as we sort of said, there's a lot of anxiety. People find these subjects kind of challenging and difficult. So knowing that there's other people that are around us that are also going through that same kind of challenges, I think is really important, and kind of feeling like we've got that sense of community is really a real positive thing. So great. I'm just going to start sort of reading some of these out as you guys are doing it. So so on the short-term individual, kind of got reduce, reuse, and repurpose and recycle. So kind of again on that waste management. Got an improved sort of diet. So that's good to kind of see. Yeah, sustainable diet and purchases. Start using sustainable transport options. Great. Actually then going to measure their emissions. Someone's going to do that. Reduce single-use plastics, great to see, and change transport methods. So yeah, it'd be great to see if all of these can kind of come to fruition. So again, looking at the short term across the organisation, create a plan to collect the data to require impact. So yeah, so we actually run a course, like a 12-hour course, which is over 2 days, and it's a carbon footprinting workshop and a carbon action planning workshop again. So if that's something which is of interest to you and you want to look at how you can kind of collect that information and plan, then there's a course which we'll be kind of signposting to shortly. So yeah, sort of, if that is something you want to do, then I can send you through the details. Yeah, accessing sustainability in the workplace. Again, something hopefully, it could be that you are the person now that can take that sustainability agenda within your organisation and really strive for it. Yeah, conduct a Scope 3 carbon audit. Yes, great. That's a very ambitious for a short term, 1 to 2, 3 week. But yeah, that's great to see. And an eco internship. Yes, fantastic ideas here for the organisation. Again, in the short term. And midterm, looking at the individual, so educating the family members. That's a great one. And in terms of that sphere of influence of people that we're really hoping to kind of impact here as individuals. Yeah, people within our family often, again, it can be a bone of contention. And it's interesting, yeah, the elderly may not be aware. And again, with that equity, sometimes those people that have had the best of it, of course, the most damage and the least maybe understanding of it. So yeah, really interesting one. Review utility provider. Yeah, this is again, even from the existing utility providers, they can often be kind of greener tariffs that are available. Okay, reduce meat consumption. Good, nice, thanks. Yeah, all really, really good kind of action points. Yeah, shift to more sustainable energy sources. Yeah. Become more politically aware. So yeah, that's a really interesting one. Again, kind of the policies and politics and the governance that we have, which kind of implements and impacts the things, but it might be so kind of disconnected, I suppose, with the everyday today with an individual, that these things are happening behind the scenes on a kind of local government kind of basis. So yeah, so that's really really interesting to see that's up on there. Again, looking at the midterm and the organisation. Again, communication campaign to raise awareness. Again, yeah, that communication is so key in helping people, and that kind of thumb print. So that raising of awareness, just so people are some people aren't even aware of the problem, or they don't necessarily relate the problem to necessarily climate change, and they don't see how it relates to them. So helping them to become aware of that is again really fundamental. Okay, yeah, good. I can see beginning sustainability reporting. Someone's writing in there. More car sharing, more care sharing. It is more caring to car share. And yeah, working on climate targets. So again, yeah, working on the targets is great, really good thing to do. So moving across them to the local context in the midterm, lobbying PCC for better locals. Yeah, that's it. We need to again, that's kind of being that activist role. Actually, how can we kind of instigate change, get the council to do the things that we want them to be doing? Great. So onto the kind of longer term plans here as an individual. Reduce travel impact, yeah. Changing to renewable energy provider, yeah. Again, similar ones, but just on the individual basis, but just a longer term. So I see everyone's got their own timelines. So really interesting to see similar things in different kind of time horizons here that you guys are looking at. Again, moving across, yeah, change banks, yeah. It's it can be a tricky one if you've got a lot of history tied up with your bank. Looking at scope 3 on an organisational long term, greenhouse gas reduction, yeah, organisational policies again, yeah, looking at policies, how do you have policies in place? Can they be updated? Can they be reviewed to implement best practice? And then utilising sort of public transport, yeah, plant wildfires in the pub garden, lovely. I love that idea. Yeah, the aim of engaging customers, teach them, yeah, so it's sort of, again, it's those co-benefits that we see. So you've got a biodiversity win, you've got a beautiful kind of thing to look at, people can engage with it, but also using that as an educational tool to actually to let people that are coming to the pub know. And a great, I love seeing it in a way that's, this kind of way of learning isn't necessarily for everyone, but if you can catch them when they're at the pub, where they might be kind of open to the conversation around that. It's great to see people engaging in that kind of way with it, and that's really what it needs. It needs it kind of on all fronts. So yeah, really, really great idea, that one. I love that. Creating green jobs, got some waste management, moving it into the kind of local area on the longer term. Invest in large scale renewable energy projects. Yeah, wind farms. Green buildings, yeah. So we're going to be seeing more sort of onshore wind farms. We've got Celtic Sea Power and lots of energy potential in the region, which is phenomenal. And again, a lot of green jobs that could potentially come out of this. So yeah, that's been really, really helpful. So thank you, guys. What we'll do is we'll take some snapshots of this as well. So we'll send it out when we kind of circulate the material afterwards, so that everyone kind of has access to it. Everyone kind of can review what people have written and done and said. And if you want to kind of take that away and use this as a basis to kind of form part of an action plan as you individually for an organisation or wider, then then by all means, please do that. It's just good to kind of have those plans. So right, I'm going to jump back now to the PowerPoint presentation and just kind of round it off, so with a bit of a summary. So bear with me 2 seconds. Okay. So in this next slide, really what I want to kind of reiterate to you guys as well is there is hope. It's not all doom and gloom, and there is, things that are happening, as we've seen within those local contexts, those action plans that have been in place for the last 5 years. And there's lots of people doing some really, really great work to mitigate, to adapt to it, to kind of drive their organisations, their communities, their councils to do these things. So really what I'm hoping is that you can kind of jump on that and kind of get some encouragement from it. And so this is a kind of a picture from Cypher, and again it says that everyone should know and celebrate that the world is making genuine progress on climate change, but it's not enough. But it is progress. So we're really seeing a lot of government pledges, a lot of targets, but there's still a bit of a gap. So